Well, welcome, Lee Maxey, CEO at MindMax, and I'm delighted to be here with Jim Fong, the Chief Research Officer for UPCEA. And Jim and I have known each other for quite a few years.
At least 20.
Yeah, close to 20 years, exactly. And I'll be interested to hear some of your thoughts. I think you are both thoughtful about what's going on, but you're also looking forward. And trying to look backwards and looking at now to try and justify some of your ideas about what's going or might happen in the future.
Yeah.
So, you and I have talked about the demographics. You've talked about, I've seen presentations where you've talked about the changes in what students want, depending on who they are and how much education that they've had to date, and what their life circumstances are, economic conditions. So, love to hear your thoughts about how you see things going in the next few years in the online learning market, but the higher ed market in general.
Well, yeah, and thank you very much, Lee. Thank you for this opportunity for me to be part of this because, as you know, and as our history kind of shows here, is that I've been in my role as Chief Research Officer. I try to take a data-driven approach. I try to consume as much research as I can, and I process it, and I try to provide information back to our constituents about where the market's going. So, but I always try to ground myself into one area, one or two areas. Like 10 years ago, I was looking at the online grad market because our members were looking into it. But I also knew that, and when I was studying millennials, that something else is going to happen in the marketplace. And then I shifted this toward the whole microcredential, alternative credential market because I had an aha moment. And now I'm shifting it yet again because microcredentials and alternative credentials and stackability has really caught momentum now. And so now I'm starting to study the economics of the adult learner because we're in the middle of a demographic cliff, but there's a lot of things that could shift our academic portfolios one direction or another, or accelerate or decelerate them. So I'm trying to help our membership be one or two steps, to look one or two steps ahead as opposed to what's in front of them. So that's been my role. It's trying to consume as much data, process it in a way that, it isn't so much my beliefs, even though I consume it and I have direction there. I try to make it so it's not Jim Fong biased. It's hopefully industry biased, and I try to validate it when I can. So that's kind of been my approach. So there are a lot of things that are happening in the marketplace.
We do a lot of work with re-enrollment, and as you know, whatever the number is, 44 million, some college and no degree. And one of the things that we talk about with schools that we work with is not everyone wants to come back and get a degree, or this isn't the right time for them to do that, and other pathways are needed. What are your thoughts about that very large population, a tenth of our country's population, right, with some college and no degree?
Well, when I saw it, it was 39.1 million, and then it grew to 40 million. Then it grew up to 42 million, and I think the last number I saw was 44 million. When I was looking at those numbers, I felt like, okay, we're coming out of a pandemic. Higher education is going to be ready. These adult learners are going to be ready. We're going to stop it at like 40 or 42 million, but now it's still growing. And so that's telling me that the marketplace has not fully embraced what we've been doing. We've still got to challenge ourselves. And this, I feel that some college no degree audience could be the savior for colleges that are going to be showing less revenue due to decreased enrollments from the traditional student. So this adult learner base could be worth, millions or whatever to an institution. However, with these growing some college no degree audiences, it's telling me that we're not quite connected to it. And I look at coming out of the pandemic, and some of the research that we did is that these adult learners, they don't want to get caught off guard again. And to commit to a full degree, if you've got 40 credits and you're going to commit to 120 credits in a degree completion program, that's a big commitment. So I think as we evolve in our economy, in our industry, these students are seeing other alternatives, and they're seeing alternatives around stackable certificates. And I come out of the Penn State system. I worked at Penn State about 16 years ago. They just came out with an article about their stackability. I look at institutions like University of Maryland Global Campus. They've got a wonderfully balanced stackable portfolio where you can get in through certificates, and then you can get in through degrees. And I think there's other instances around the country where people are building more non-credit to credit pathways. And I think that model caters more toward Gen Z and millennial learners. They don't want to commit to the full 50,000, but they'll buy 5 pieces of 10,000 potentially, or they'll buy 100 pieces of 500. I think these are all things that we have to look at, because our consumer is so different than consumers of the past.
Yeah. I loved the Convergence Conference last year. I thought it was a great step into that conversation. And what was particularly struck me was registrars who were trying to make it work. Can you talk about where you see the conference Convergence heading, but also this concept of stackability, the portable transcript, the transcript that is different, that might be for smaller, I'll call it units or credentials.
Well, I look at the whole registrar relationship in the past. It was very rules-based, following federal guidelines, following institutional guidelines, all built around the 120 credit or the 30 or 36 credit graduate model. And things were done in a particular way. Financial aid was done in a particular way, very rules-based. And now that model is changing. And I think the more progressive registrars, and it also signals a culture within the rest of the university that their registrars are realizing it. And they're seeing that they've got to figure this thing out, and they've got to change systems and processes, because not all the money is coming from the state and the federal government anymore. It's coming from multiple sources, and the economy is changing. And I think it's also a reflection of that higher education has gone away from its ivory tower castle to be more dependent on reactions in the marketplace. That colleges don't create degrees that create the economy. Now it's acting towards colleges are part of that economy and provide input to the economy. So therefore, we've got to work better together. So it isn't an ivory tower mentality anymore. And I think that the early adopters, in terms of the registrars and all this, they see it either more strategically and they can forecast it better, or they're acting upon declining enrollments and declining forecasts, and they see the writing on the wall. So they've got to put it all together. And now, as a result, we've got to change systems, and the systems have got to be more flexible, or they can't be legacy based, because a number of institutions had their own legacy based enrollment systems or student information systems because they hadn't had to change anything. Now we're changing things, and I think that's going to be a challenge for a lot of institutions, but it's a necessary one if they want to compete in the future.
Yeah, one of the things that rankles me is when I hear people talk about higher ed as this monolithic thing.
Right.
And Stephen Mintz had an article recently talking about what is the point? What is higher ed about? And it's different. And so I'm thinking there are different types of schools, and embracing and starting to use more precise language to talk about this school is a trade school. This school, I mean, we use a few things from the Carnegie classifications, but to even get more precise. You mentioned some schools that are at risk because of revenue. And I think, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on how could schools embrace, I'll call it focus, or being better at the thing that they're good at.
Yeah, and I think some of it, if you look back at the land grant mission many years ago, and this isn't just for land grant institutions, they were asked to contribute to society and an economy in a particular way. They were going to drive a lot. And our speaker yesterday, opening speaker, talked about the fourth economic revolution here, and we are in a new revolution here. 10, 20 years ago, we entered the internet revolution and the cloud-based revolution. Now we're moving into automation and data. And we need to understand that better. And how do we actually prepare that workforce for it? We can't, colleges and universities in the past, they created leaders. They created highly specialized people in areas, or thinkers that could actually kind of adapt to the employment needs and the economic needs. Now we're in a situation where we've got to learn two ways, because the economy is being driven by a lot of different factors right now. So the role of higher education is maybe not so much in that driver's seat role, but they're in the passenger seat, or they're co-driving or something. but they've got to adapt their model here to be more in line with business and industry. And I think that's the biggest factor. In business and industry, you look at who's making the decision right now. We've got millennials that are 37, 38 years old that are in senior management positions that learned on online when they were going through high school or went through Khan Academy and other things like that. So they're embracing different, they're more open to different technologies. And we did a lot of research 10 years ago where we looked at generational preferences toward education among business leaders, and we saw a baby boom generation and a Gen X generation that hadn't fully embraced online or micro-credentials. But we saw the millennial generation, those that were millennial managers, that started to embrace that. And I think that's starting to happen more and more. They're making more of the decisions, and I think that's going to drive how corporations and employers will interface with higher education.
So there's an implication about AI in what you're talking about. I don't know if you've heard about artificial intelligence.
Yes,
but,
I have.
So obviously, big impact in all areas of our life. I think there's all tremendous opportunity, also some challenging change management, emotional and otherwise, that people are going to have to deal with. Talk about some of the benefits that you see and the opportunities you see with AI in higher ed.
Well, AI obviously is such a wide range type of discussion right now. I'm going to focus it in on just one area where I think it helps our constituency around UPCEA. And I look at how do we actually connect it to higher education? How do we connect higher education to the employment sector? And what is the role of AI? Yes, AI, students are using it and we can't get around it. We have to address it. And people are talking, instructors and faculty are concerned about plagiarism and unique thinking and other things like that. But on the higher education side, the continuing and online education side, I think that there's some benefits that we can look at, is because right now we have very complicated processes and where AI could really help us. One of the big things that I see is one of the huge issues here is non-credit to credit transfer. And if we break down non-credit programs and we look at some credit programs, there's some areas where we're teaching the same thing, but we refuse to acknowledge it. And I think that's where AI can play a role here. But let's take that even a step further. If we know what it takes to be an effective accountant, and we know the degrees that make an effective accountant, and we know the workshops and the additional professional training that makes an effective accountant. But if we look downstream, what are these other things that make an effective accountant? And we look at skills, and we look at job descriptions, but we also look at syllabi, and we look at what LinkedIn profiles are doing, and what are the successful accountants in the world, and we look at all this. I think AI has got a potential to pull all that data in and say, you need to learn this, this, and this, as opposed to a human saying, you really should learn how to do this because I'm a full-time professor. I've been studying this for 40 years, and this is what I think, because I'm involved with the American Association of Accounting, and these are our principles. I think if we can actually take a data-driven approach, and that's where AI can do it, we can actually link curriculum and employment and successful employment much better than we're doing right now, because it's very subjective and it's very labor intensive, and it's so hard to look at something that someone learned at a professional workshop and say, wow, you learned cybersecurity here, but you're learning it here in this credit area. I think AI can tie some of those things together.
Yep. So you and I are going to be collaborating on an article. One of the things that we'd like to look at in that article is the role of OPMs and how that's changed over time and where that might be headed. Obviously, OPMs were incredibly useful to higher ed, super catalyst and a vehicle to enable schools to get online and to be effectively able to reach more students. What are your thoughts about where things might be heading related to the OPM space and that concept of using outsourced program managers?
Yeah, and I look at, I'm going to reflect back on my career at Penn State. I joined there in 1997, and we built everything. And we built everything very slowly. And we built everything the way we wanted to make them. And I was looking at the OPM models that were out there. There were some providers out there that were trying to get institutions to buy, and they were moving fast to the market. there were folks that were doing a lot of instructional design and LMS, and they were getting smaller institutions faster to the market. So I remember presenting at an UPCEA conference, and we had, in this small institution in either Montana or South Dakota had just as many enrollments as we had at Penn State after 3 years of launching. And it's because they had the expertise and the resources of an OPM. And I look at it, what actually happened during the pandemic. Higher education would not have survived without the services of an OPM. And then now I look at, we came out of the OPM, out of the pandemic, and now the federal government and others, and mostly faculty at campuses are attacking the value of an OPM. And so it's just, they look at more so the revenue sharing kind of arrangements of it. So there's a lot of kind of friction that's going on in the marketplace. But I look at as we move forward in higher education here, what are our core competencies as institutions? What should we be doing by ourselves, or what are we not going to be doing well? And what's that role of that OPM in here? And I think the OPMs have also matured and become more flexible, and they've reacted to the marketplace by unbundling services. And I think that's a great model, because all of a sudden an institution that's in a hiring freeze that needs to get their programs out there can hire a OPM to do their marketing and enrollment management. I think it's really, you need to have a real relational fit, and you need to look at what your situation is at the institution to see if it fits. I mean, I'm a believer that if you can do it yourself, and you can do it better, great, but can you do it affordably is another thing. It's a very complicated dynamic here, but I have a lot of love for a number of OPMs because they've helped colleges survive. And then I've looked at other relationships where they're not really, they're providing services and enrollments are okay, but in the institution doesn't know better, and so they can't grow. So so it's not a mutually beneficial relationship.
Right.
So I think we've got to look at that and look at the best of the best as we move forward here, because there is a role. It just depends on, what your situation, what your business goals are.
I think we're a value-driven organization. One of the things we look for are, you mentioned the word fit, and I think that really is what makes it work. If there's a fit, both culturally, services standpoint, needs. A lot of schools are strapped. They don't have the flexibility, they don't have the agility or budget to do certain things, or headcount. And so it's expertise, it's bandwidth, it's just general capability. What are some of the things that you see on the horizon in the next year or so? I know we have an election coming up, and things could go a lot of different ways. Depending on whose administration is in office. What do you see happening in the I'll call it near term from a higher ed standpoint?
And that's such a great question here, and it's a question that I am concerned about, because you look at currently we have a Democratic administration here, and we're struggling with a number of issues right now in terms of our higher education model and policy behind it, and the requirements of of online learning and other things like that. But it's status quo, but it's a lot of things that are going to be hard for institutions to do. But it's working within the same model that we are. So we're able to tweak it. We're able to react very quickly, and I think the whole role of Stackability is a long-term play at this point. It's 3, 5, maybe 10 years kind of, and you've got to build out this model here. I think in a more Republican administration, and I look, I've read a few documents here. It looks like the value of a degree is slightly less, except for obvious areas here. But there's a greater focus on skills there, and I think it's going to accelerate the non-credit professional education side as well as a Stackability side. I think the degree, and I think it's really going to impact the number and the rate that people enroll into fully online degrees. I think people, even when they look at these new, regardless of political party here, they're going to look at it, and learners are going to want to say, I'm going to take less risk. I'm going to take something that I can stack in, store it in a virtual wallet or a virtual transcript, and then 3 years from now, I will start back up, but I'm not going to lose those credits or those points or those whatever. And I think those are the models that adult learners are going to look toward, depending on what type of administration is. But I think that in a GOP-driven model here, we're going to see a de-emphasize, and we're already seeing a de-emphasizing of the degree in favor of other models here. Higher education is not going to go away. It's just going to be what pathway we're going to emphasize, and that pathway will accelerate stackability and microcredentials.
So some closing thoughts, or we've got approximately 5,000 schools. A lot of them are closing. Not a lot of them, but
a number of
there's
them.
Many are closing. More are closing each year. What are some of your thoughts about the future of higher ed in general?
Well, it's tough. The math is really tough, and I don't want to come across as insensitive, but every single time a college closes here, I feel it. I feel it. It's like it's sad when College X in Boston has announced closure, or College X in Buffalo is gonna merge with this other college and lose its identity. And then I took a bike ride across West Virginia 2 years ago, and I saw a college that was shuttered and had chain link fence around it, and that saddens me because I value education. That's the reason why I took this career the way I did. But I feel that colleges have got to look at greater innovation. They've got to look at what program can I do, what programs could I break down, and how do I get them to the marketplace better or quicker or earlier. We're stuck. We're seeing colleges close because they didn't anticipate the market. I feel as well. They didn't invest into the right areas. They were steeped in tradition, and it saddens me. But then we see small colleges that are thriving, that are doing the right thing, that are getting ahead of it. Although there's a lot of infighting, internally about some of the product lines and some of the degrees they're offering. Some of these things are helping institutions survive, and I especially think that the whole microcredential market here will help offset losses, and I'm hopeful. And I think that if we can overcome the economic pressures that these 44 million some college and no degree students are facing, we will help. But I think that's going to be a major challenge here, is that how do we make college more affordable, or how do we get them to be able to afford homes and transportation and food, and as well as, because when they make choices, they're going to make choices based on family, their job, and then where does college fit into it? Where does education fit into it? Right. So we've got a lot of challenges and opportunity if we want to tap into that 44 million and more. So,
well, thank you, Jim. This has been great.
Thank you very much, Lee.
Enjoyed chatting.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Always enjoy hearing you. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.